It's a pleasure to be with you all today. So just a very quick word on Involve. We're a consultancy driving inclusion in the workplace, and we help businesses build more equitable environments where all talent can succeed. So we're incredibly thankful for our partnership with the International School of ESG and with Joe Walker as well today. And the fact as well that we have this platform today to have this conversation on the S of the ESG and understanding social impact. So I just thought it would be helpful to kind of like cover 5 key areas. And I'll provide kind of like a quick intro to each area with insight from Involve and the conversations we've been having with different clients. And then I'll ask you, Joe, to provide an inside view from Royal London and your perspectives as a professional and as an expert in this field. All good?
Sounds great.
Cool. So let's kick off then. So in terms of the first question that we were thinking about, it was around social activity and basically how it falls within the scope of ESG and how it interacts with both the environmental and governance concerns. So I think just one key social activity that falls within the scope of ESG has been an organization's treatment basically of its employees and its labor practices really. So in terms of interactions with environmental and governance, it actually falls in many ways, such as fair pay, of course, benefits for employees that tie into social responsibility, ethical business practices, workplace health, safety, employee well-being, which impact productivity, and of course, operational risks on the governance side. And more closer to our work as well, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that promote a positive workplace culture and actually mitigate legal and reputational risks. So again, on the governance side and socials as well. So Joe, what would you add to this in terms of how does social future within the sustainability agenda at Royal London?
Yeah, sure. I think it's funny having I find the term ESG is such an interesting one because you've got these sort of 3 separate words, but they are so closely interlinked. And and I think that if I consider our like our climate strategy and the environmental aspects and the sort of transition to net zero, we absolutely need to consider the societal impacts of that transition to net zero. So in Royal London, we talk about a just transition or a fair transition to a sustainable world. And that just means like considering like upskilling your people in green skills, making sure that you are considering the people aspects, the people impacts of the transition. And, you know, when you're thinking about the governance angle, like you say, you know, I guess like a poorly run company, you know, isn't going to be supporting its people well. So yeah, whether that's policy, like you say, reward, anything like that. I think yeah, it's absolutely absolutely critical. And I guess sort of with the S, I always think that it's a bit of the laggard, I guess, in the sense of ESG. I think historically E and G have been much more like easily defined, and they're like sort of really clearly defined, whereas and maybe the regulatory sort of environment was a little different for the S, and that's, you know, that's really shifted, that's changing, and certainly I think we are getting better at defining it, but I think organizations do define it differently and need to work out what that S means for them, what's material for them.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. That alignment piece is going to be very necessary to be able to have impactful demonstrate, sorry, that what is being done is actually being impactful. So when actually determining these social priorities within that kind of like ESG agenda, I think there are some things that really need to be taken into consideration as well, such as stakeholder engagement, like really mapping out, basically assessing different stakeholders and how the social issues can impact and are relevant to those specific groups. So really, whether that's employees, customers, communities, investors, and really engaging with them through surveys, through interviews, focus groups, to understand the priorities for each group. And of course, there are going to be as well like different priorities within the groups as well. But really and around their own expectations when it comes to social responsibility for their company, and really aligning, I think, those priorities with the company's culture, with their core values, their commitments. So I think that's been quite something that we've been seeing quite a lot with the companies that we've been partnering with, and basically really making sure that they can assess as well kind of like the potential social risk across the different operations of value chain, the human rights, labor practices, et cetera, to really prioritize social issues that are actually going to pose a greater risk for them, and that are actually going to be the main areas of focus for them. So whether that's done as well as you mentioned, like following some regulations on the topic, of course, at different levels, whether that's in the UK, in Europe, or more largely through the UN Sustainable Development Goals, for example. It's really about aligning those, I think. And so which areas of kind of like that social component are most important to an organization like Royal London? And how do you actually decide these?
Sure, good question. I think maybe if I just start with some context for those who maybe don't know Royal London. We're the UK's largest mutual life insurance, pensions and investments company. And when I say we're a mutual, we're owned by our customers, right? So that's a little bit of a differentiator for us if we when we're considering those sort of societal impacts, because our customers are our owners, and most of our colleagues have pensions, have the workplace pension with Royal London, and therefore our members, they are owners of the company, and that's sort of a little bit different. And about 5 years ago, when Barry O'Dwyer, our current CEO, joined the business, he did a lot of work around listening to colleagues, listening to customers, members, and really getting under the skin of what's Royal London about, what's our purpose, and so then developed what our purpose is with all those groups, and that's to protecting today, investing in tomorrow. Together we are mutually responsible. And I feel like social impact is like inherent in that purpose statement. And, to underpinning that, we've developed our purpose outcomes, 3 purpose outcomes that we want to achieve to support our customers, members, and wider society. And that's strengthening the mutual choice. So ensuring that Royal London is here for many future generations to come. But then building financial resilience. So that's absolutely, critical, particularly, when you consider the recent cost of living crisis that continues in the UK. And then the other element is moving fairly to a sustainable world. And that's that bit I was talking about earlier, that just transition, and that we've got a part to play in that. And really, our social impact strategy, how we define our priorities, is aligning to that purpose. How will we deliver that purpose? And I guess like a couple of examples of what those priorities are. Well, we want to prevent life shocks from impacting people's ability to live live their lives, or to have to be financially resilient. So we've got a charity partnership with Cancer Research UK, specifically looking at diversity, inclusion, and in cancers, and the sort of particularly the sort of lack of diagnosis of cancers in Black people and other things like that, where how do we start tackling the injustices that exist in things like cancer. So we're working specifically on cancer research with Cancer Research UK on that research. We also work with Turn to Us, which is a sort of a national poverty charity, and they can sort of signpost, people to grants and different ways they can access finance. So it's not just about our customers who maybe they can afford some customers can afford a financial advisor, but most people can't or don't know how to get financial advice. And so being able to sort of support them in building their financial resilience through different avenues, I think it's just inherent in everything that we do.
That's so interesting. Thanks, Joe. And I think it's really also a kind of like an interesting setup that you have, of course, in terms of those groups of stakeholders that you're engaging with. It's quite different at Royal London when you compare it to other corporates. Oh, well, to corporates out there. So I love that perspective. Actually, it's a much more, I would say, perhaps human-centric perspective. So I think in terms of when we talk about ESG strategy, one of the most important components that come up is really the measurement. And so I think we're in agreement when we say that, on the environmental and governance side, lots of data, lots of measurements and different standards, et cetera, and reporting standards. And so at the moment, at least, there isn't such a clear like standard when it comes to the social component of reporting. So in terms of actually putting together those metrics, I think what we've seen from the companies that we engage with is really they are trying to establish KPIs, so key performance indicators that are related to that social component. So whether that's employee engagement, diversity metrics, turnover metrics, KPIs that align as well with kind of like the recognized reporting standards. There are still a few. It's just about aligning them all. So GRI, SASB, et cetera. Then implementing the systems and the processes to systematically actually collect the data so that there is some consistency to it, and so that it can really be done as well across all business units within a company and geographies as well. And hopefully that data is a good basis, it's a good foundation, but also complementing it with actual conversations that are happening with the different stakeholders that we talked about. So actually, complementing with qualitative feedback that really kind of like adds to that quantitative KPI data. So I don't know, in terms of your own experience, Joe, how does that challenge on collecting the S data, how do you see it differ from the challenges in collecting and tracking environmental based data, for example?
Yeah, you're spot on. The data from a data perspective, the social data is really far behind, and I think that's to do with what we talked about earlier around that what the definition even of social and social impact and what is included in that. I think that but that's not to say that I mean, there are many challenges around environmental data too, and I think sometimes we can get a little bit stuck on this sort of obsession with perfect data and measurement. I think what we're grappling with at the moment is that we've got quite well established metrics in terms of input, so we can sort of measure reach. We can say, we have set up this this helpline for and we sent out this amount of letters and we sent out this amount of provided access to this number of people, but that doesn't then translate to impact. And how do you measure the impact, the outcome that you've driven? And for Royal London being have our own asset in-house asset manager that manages over 95% of our assets, circa 160 billion of assets under management, and a core part of our responsible investment strategy is around engagement with the companies in which we invest to to change for better, right? And there's the number of different engagement themes that we have, and some of those are around social factors. There's just transition, financial inclusion, diversity and inclusion, human rights and modern slavery. There's a number of different engagement topics that we cover in the sort of social space, and we can engage with that company and try to influence them to have better policies in place or better structures. We can use our votes at their AGMs to vote against management if we don't feel that they have got the right policies in place. There's loads of different levers that we have at our disposal as investors with these companies. And that's great. We can measure that, so we can say we have voted at this number of AGMs, we have sent this number of letters to management, we have held this number of meetings with the chairs, the boards of these organizations. But how do we attribute any change? So even if there is change and you can see, great, so this X company has now is now disclosing their diversity data. For example, they're disclosing their gender pay gap, they're disclosing their race, ethnicity pay gap. Great, but can we say that Royal London made that change? And in reality, probably not Royal London alone. And the important thing is that the change has happened, and we can report that. But I think what I'd sort of caution against is sort of getting either too obsessed with the data, but also over claiming, right? We know with the recent FCA anti-greenwashing rule that came into force at the end of May, the regulators focused on this sort of overstating, over-claiming, and I think that's the same in the social space, that you can sort of overclaim the sort of impact that you've had, or mislead the reader, your audience, whoever your audience is, in terms of the impact that you've had. I've seen a lot of some of our peers making have these big sort of statements out there. Our strategy is to impact 100 million people, and they provide, it's like, well, what does that mean? And they'll say, they'll provide updates, and we've impacted 50 million people, and there's a little footnote, and at the bottom that includes every employee of every organization that they partner with, and that has potentially had the opportunity to maybe have received that support. And that, for me, is misleading, and given there are so many societal challenges that we still need to fix, that we also need to not be too quick to sort of claim great successes, when really you're claiming on the input what you've done, which is great, and that's really important. But let's be clear that that's not impact, or not necessarily all of it is impact. There will be impact in there, but it's not the whole picture. So definitely challenging. I'd say if anyone on the call is sort of at the start of this journey, a really good place to start is charities, because charities have been measuring and figuring out the measurement of impact and outcomes forever. That's to be successful as businesses, they need to be able to say, we do this to help this, and this is how we've done that. And so certainly for Royal London, working with our charity partners has really helped us to shape that and sort of crystallize how we consider those data points. Don't know if that's helpful, but that's where we're at. It's not easy.
That's a really fair point. Actually, that's a really fair point, Jo. And in terms of the charities, of course, they've had to kind of justify the how they're spending the money, either from, of course, the government or big corporates to actually demonstrate that impact. So you're right, absolutely. They probably have a lot that we can learn from. So yeah, in terms of that, that data piece, I think it is important not to over focus on it. But also some of it is very difficult to measure. So of course you have kind of direct outputs that you can measure in terms of I don't know, number of people who have participated in something, or number of products that have been distributed, or the number of trainings that you've been conducting. But how do you actually measure the impact of those in terms of changes in knowledge, changes in skills, behavior? That's very, of course, it's quite a lot more subjective. So it's very difficult to measure the real impact. And from rolling out a lot of awareness programs and campaigns, we know it's very hard as well. So we can measure the immediate feedback, of course, but how do we know that's going to change affect someone's behavior in 6 months' time? Well, we have no idea, of course. But yeah, so I absolutely get it. And in terms of other types of data that are kind of like helpful, of course, surveys, assessments, in terms of actually trying to capture that change in attitude or practice is still helpful. There are still ways to do it. Performance metrics as well, which are aligned to some of the goals that you have set, whether that's job placement rates or literacy rates when it comes to different themes or programs. And then, of course, the feedback, as I mentioned, like from the stakeholders that you're engaging with, whether that's your communities, your partners, and how you can, again, kind of like add to that data, add insights to that data through that human element of actually having conversations with people, whether that's focus groups, interviews, etc., etc. So yeah, I think I think all of that makes it a kind of like a stronger case, but of course it can be just as straightforward, I think, as environmental or governance reporting, which is a lot more objective in a way. So less subjective, at least.
Yeah.
So in terms of Joe, you actually, how do you go about setting a target for your ESG activities, and what do you consider when committing to and publishing a specific focus?
Yeah, I think what's really important is an organization being really clear about the impact that they're intending to have, and a clear route to get there, to then be able to set a target around the S. And we talk a lot internally around theory of change and sort of how, okay, so if this is where we want to get to, let's just work backwards from that and understand that theory of change, and what then are those sort of maybe smaller interim targets to get us there. I think authenticity and transparency in the setting of targets, and being really clear about both what those targets are and what they are not, and the limitations of those targets, and that's exactly the same for the E. If I think about our net zero targets, it's the same. There are a number of sort of caveats to that target. There are limitations that we have. I think one of the things that I was chatting to one of our social impact managers yesterday, and she was saying she would sort of consider whether a sort of a number, whether committing to a number is helpful. Now we have, interesting, we do have a number in terms of financial. So we've committed to contributing 1% of our pre-tax profit to social impact causes. And we do that through a mixture of both those charity partners that I talked about, and investing in different programs through that, but also we have a change makers program where we invest in social entrepreneurs who are directly addressing either the building financial resilience part of our purpose, or the moving fairly to a sustainable world part of our purpose. So we have that target to use that 1% of profits. I think that then, other than that, we don't have any further targets. And what our social impact manager was saying to me was that sometimes for the charity sector or social impact sector, that those kinds of really specific targets, KPIs, can actually take away from the important, impactful work, because it might not meet the numerical goal, but there's still something really great happening, and maybe there's some different things happen. And I just thought that was interesting, something that I hadn't really quite thought about, and something to consider. And so you know, certainly when we were considering investing 1% of profits, we didn't like, there was a lot of challenge from our board around, well, what's actually going to happen to that money. And I like, that's really important. It's like, okay, there's a number there, but what are we trying to achieve with that? And that's what I mean by sort of starting with, okay, there's the goal, where let's work back from that. So we've got our purpose. We want to build financial resilience. We want to move fairly to a sustainable world. How do we use that 1% of profits to help us do that? And there are lots of different ways in which to do that, and then we work that back and see whether that has the impact. So does that 1% lead us to moving fairly to a sustainable world or building financial resilience? And I think I would always recommend that sort of going back to your goal, your ultimate purpose, your vision, when thinking about setting those sort of targets. And I think that those targets can be a mix of that real sort of numerical based, and some of it less so. It can be more of that kind of purpose type target. You know, helping build financial resilience is a target that we have. It doesn't have a number necessarily next to it, because what that means changes, and it's different for each customer and each member of society.
Yeah, that's so interesting, actually. Yeah, again, it's quite a subjective goal rather than a very objective one that you can attach a numerical figure to. That's so interesting, Joe. Thanks for sharing that. And actually the reporting part and kind of like, which obviously in terms of communicating as well, that your approach to social impact, whether that's with internal or external stakeholders. I think we've talked about a few kind of like things that companies can do, such as, you know, as I said earlier, the kind of like this stakeholder engagement piece, where it's really assessing kind of like the materiality of what is being done and how it kind of like serves to really identify the key social issues. I think that context also provides kind of like when you're communicating to those stakeholders actually about what you're intending to do, your intention with this is actually also getting them on board, getting them to participate in a way and contribute. So I think about those clear indicators that are going to be basically that are going to demonstrate, the actual social impact of what you're doing. So whether that's also in line, of course, with some of the reporting standards, whether that's also being measured through audits with third-party organizations, or actually also just putting it into an ESG report that you're doing it annually to really demonstrate the social impacts, or wider kind of like sustainability report. I think it's really about kind of like trying to galvanize the energy around it, the work that you're doing, of course, but also kind of like the whole company is being part of it, the whole, the stakeholders, whether they're internal, external, the leaders that need to be driving this as well, and role modeling the conversations and making sure that we're all kind of like aligning when it comes to those objectives. So what does actually ESG reporting look like at Royal London, and how has this developed like over time?
I think firstly I'll say we are on the journey. We are not we're not there yet, and we're maybe in comparison to some of our sort of PLC peers, we might be a little bit behind, if I'm honest. And I think that's part of that, is that we're really grappling with how we do this in an authentic way. And as we've just sort of, to all the points that we've already discussed today around the challenges of data, and that's definitely plays into it. But we are further ahead in other reports, so that's really good because we can learn from what we've done there. So if I think about climate reporting, we've been doing climate reporting for a number of years now, and we do report on our social impact through our annual report and accounts. We also do it, I guess, a little bit more, and being a sort of customer in business, creating videos for customers with like other different kinds of content. So certainly with that change makers program that I mentioned, the social entrepreneurs that we work with, we've done a number of videos with those change makers to help bring to life the work that we're doing with these social entrepreneurs. So I think that's definitely been, and that's had really great engagement and customers really commenting back and engaging with that. We had our AGM a couple of weeks ago, and what was like fascinating was that some of the questions that came from members were really so focused on that social impact lens. And they, one customer was just like, I love your partnership with Cancer Research UK, so important. And she like had this whole story of how she really engaged with that. And I guess that's maybe a little different to a number of AGMs where you would have sort of your typical shareholders. It's a little different when you've got your customers are your shareholders. And that's really powerful sort of way for us to communicate with our members. And I had a number of conversations with those customers around what we're doing and how they really want to, they feel engaged in that sort of social impact activity. And I think that's critical. That's another part of the business case for it as well, that kind of intangible, the connection that those customers feel with Royal London because of that activity. They're more likely to keep their money with Royal London, their business with Royal London. And I think we shouldn't underestimate that. But yeah, we definitely we don't have an ESG report yet, like a broader sustainability report. I think that's something we will work towards. But for now, it's very much sort of through our website, through our annual report and accounts, and then through other activities like our AGM. What we do have, and I guess if I was to think about a materiality perspective and thinking about where certainly from an environmental perspective, where we maybe have the most impact is through our investments. And actually, when you consider social, like the amount of reach we potentially have through all the assets and the companies in which we invest, and the influence that we might be able to have in those companies from a social perspective, it's pretty big. And so what we do produce is an annual stewardship report. And that's we're signatories of the UK Stewardship Code 2020, and in that we talk a lot around our both the diversity inclusion, both corporately, internally, but also our engagement with investee companies, and how we have oversight over our asset managers, both internal and external, and how we are driving forward that responsible investment agenda, and that, and our social impact is throughout that. So it exists, and maybe, but what I think we haven't got is this sort of like perfect, like, oh, this is our social impact report, or this is our sustainability report. And if any of the people on the call are working in this space, they will know the extreme reporting burden in which we are under. The pressures to report can sometimes limit the ability to do the work. And me and my team sometimes joke about the fact that one year we're going to have to just report that last year we did our reporting, because it's all we were able to do. So we're also always trying to find ways to streamline that, make it more efficient, be able to, and make sure that reporting is really impactful and useful for our readers. And I think sometimes that isn't a big long document. I think that maybe that's some interactive content and different ways, webinars like this. There are different ways in which you can maybe share that information without it being a sort of a single report. But that's maybe just my PTSD from extreme reporting.
There is a reporting overload, as you think, in the ESG world. So absolutely. But to actually make it more efficient, and perhaps throughout the year actually have those figures, those important stats that are being communicating throughout, whether that's not only stats, but like in reports of impact that can actually be communicated throughout the year, rather than kind of like a yearly huge report with which some people might read, but also most people might not. So making it exactly, making it more digestible as well, and more interesting to engage all year round is actually, I think, a good approach as well. So I'm conscious that I haven't seen any questions come through, but I wonder if it has been the case. Any questions from the audience?
Oh, there's one.
would setting social targets that are somewhat regarded as BAU be viewed as greenwashing? Does impact have to talk more to CSR rather than BAU activities? Would you like to take that one, Joe?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, there's so much risk around the greenwashing, and I think one of the risks is that everyone stops saying anything because they are afraid of greenwashing, and that's what we call green hushing or green blushing. There's many of these terms now, but I think that that we shouldn't ignore the BAU activities, in and of themselves, but for sure, it's the addition. We're trying to talk about here that what additionality are you having with doing this activity, and that's what, as we were discussing earlier around that sort of impact, and how do we measure the impact and be able to describe that, and being just really authentic and honest. I think it's just really important as you do that, that kind of, whether it be targets or reporting. But I think it's a fair challenge, and it's not necessarily an easy one to navigate. And certainly, like I say, we've got that 1% target, but other than that, we really want to, I feel like you can demonstrate more by just like talking about actually what you're doing rather than this sort of glitzy target. But that's just my view. Others might disagree.
Thanks, Joe. In terms of prioritizing actions based on your values works well at a high level. However, how to prioritize actions at a more granular level, given most companies operate with limited resources? If you do you consider potential financial upsides as part of this analysis? I mean, I guess it is through, I'll just quickly kind of give my opinion on this question. Just I guess in terms of that granular level, it's more about actually having those conversations with the different stakeholders who are involved as well. So basically bringing them in and actually asking them how those objectives or value, how those objectives are going to play out for them within their own business units or stakeholder groups, or and how what you need to be prioritizing in order to actually define some actions that are going to help you achieve those objectives. So I don't know, Joe, if I'm going like too high level here, but would you agree to that?
I agree, and I think I mean, if we think about it sort of as from a sort of financial upsides to this, I mean, just at its simplest, in terms of from an investments perspective, ESG integrating those ESG factors is about managing risk and return, and that's a financially sort of driven process. ESG integration, it's still a part of responsible investment, but it's definitely a sort of a financial decision ultimately. I think that also in terms of sort of maybe limited resources and how getting granular, it's sort of how do you integrate it into everyone's role, into the BAU, and because I head up a sustainability and stewardship team, and the core part of my role is embedding it in the business. Now, some organizations have endless budget and have teams that are about 5-10 times the size of my small team, and we don't have that resource because every penny we spend is member money, and that's how we consider it. We are every cost is members' money, and so actually for us to do this successfully, to make this financially viable and be sort of responsible about how we embed it, because we need to make sure that companies both have money to to, you know, a pension to take when they retire tomorrow, and we need to make sure they have a planet to retire into if they're retiring in 50 years. That, you know, in its simplest terms. So how do we balance that? We have to embed it into every part of the organization. It's not easy. We're on a journey, but I am seeing the shift happen and people considering it in the BAU. And I think that part of that is because the commercial imperative is there. Customers are asking for this. The regulator is asking for this. So more and more, it's not so much a choice; it's a must-have if you want to be a business that exists in the future.
Yeah, and with other companies, investors are asking about this as well. So obviously that actually plays a role as well. So in terms of questions, there's one in the meeting chat about environment and social considered in very different spaces within many organizations. That's true. Quite a lot of times they're quite separate. And any tips on how to get those who are driving the data and action on of ESG to increase their focus as well to consider S implications? How do you actually integrate that at Royal London, Joe?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and we are an example of that, right? So our social impact, our corporate social impact team, who sort of run our like partnership programs, like with change makers, etc. They sit in our brand and marketing team. My team sits in our CEO's office, and we also have a responsible investment team that sits in our asset manager, in our internal asset manager. There are different ESG specialists in all of those teams. We also have ESG analysts all across our asset management function. So coming together, I mean, to be honest, it's been a journey. Me and my team and the social impact team have regular meetings and sharing insights and best practice, particularly around data, because also we're on a real journey with nature and biodiversity data, which is just an absolute minefield. And so we're also facing challenges in the space, and so sharing sort of I guess good practice internally is something that we do regularly. But again, it's I wouldn't say like we've quite nailed it. It's not perfect, and there's a lot of work to sort of join all the dots internally that we continue to sort of drive and shift and iterate and find what works to get the best outcome ultimately.
Can I ask you a follow-up question on that then?
Yeah, go for
In
it.
terms of that best practice then that you share from the E and the S, what can you tell us a bit more about kind of like some of that best practice?
Yeah, so I think that we mapping the data back is something that like we've been doing a lot of work on. So it's with like getting back to the data source and like, because if you think about carbon reporting, for example, which is reasonably well established, there are still many challenges in the carbon reporting space, but it's pretty well established. There are lots of different data points that make up that end sort of CO2e figure, and ultimately some of those initial data sources, if we drill that back, how does that then map to other data points that we might want to explore and understand, and how that links to other reporting that we might want to do, or other analysis we might want to do to assess our impact in a different way. So I think that's definitely one of the things that we've been doing recently. I think also it's back to what I sort of talked about earlier, and I think our social impact team were initially just trying to drive for perfection, like how do we get the perfect data set? And I think getting comfortable with and I think being a financial services organization like this, you want the data needs to be right. Finance data, which we've been handling for donkey's years, where everyone's really comfortable with what needs to be right, and this is the limitations, these are the our sort of thresholds for. We don't really have that same thing in the ESG space, and so I think one of the things that we've been doing is sort of getting comfortable with that. Actually, it's kind of there, and kind of there is enough of an indication of where you're at, and that's probably enough to add that with your qualitative stuff and your narrative and your case studies, that then together you've got your story, your picture, whether that's to talk to your board about, whether that's to talk to external stakeholders about. And I think that's been definitely a step change in our organisation. Is sort of getting comfortable with the uncomfortableness of imperfect data.
Yeah, and it's a starting point as well. You'll, we will all learn along the journey and from each other as well. I think that's also quite important, is actually how industry players can share best practice as well amongst each other. So this is not about who's going to be more, better at it. It has to be about how everyone's going to be doing it in their way, efficiently, and hopefully we can, gather a lot about that best practice and support each other in this way.
Definitely. And I guess sort of start small, if I think about our diversity data and sort of trying to collect that, I remember when we first sort of sorted out our platform to be able to collect the data, well, that's what we did, and then we did a big campaign to try and engage colleagues to get that data, and it's just like gradually, and then you get that data. It's like, well, what do you do with that data? How do you use that to inform strategy? How do you use that to inform and affect change and understand where your gaps are, where you've got areas to focus on, and that bit, like diversity data, like if you've got a good culture in your organization, and you've got trust in your organization. We've got I think we've got 91% disclosure rate on diversity data in the organization. That's been invaluable, right? So that data exists, and you can collect it if there's trust in the organization. There are other data points which are much more difficult in the S space. So start with the things that maybe are a little easier.
Absolutely. And actually, it's good to also highlight those successes and be able to communicate about them in a way that actually shows that you're doing things with that data as well, so that it again just strengthens that culture of trust, really.
Theory of change, right? Because that's like, it's like, okay, well, that's the data, and that's what our target is, and then these are the actions that we've taken, and that's how this and the data showing that change, like sort of together. I think it really supports that.
Well, thank you. Thanks,